Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll cover all the home teams. We'll try to get to every single one of them. The New Orleans Pelicans will be up first for us, and we'll talk to New Orleans Saints, LSU, and Tulane getting ready to start their fall camp. We'll jump into that as well. As always, a fantastic panel for you from CrescentCitySports.com. Jude Young joins us on the program, along with award-winning journalist Les East. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us. Always like to start off letting the audience know a little bit about what you guys are involved in. Jude, take it away.
Eric, always a pleasure to be here, and CrescentCitySports.com every day, one of your stops for local and statewide sports news, high school, college, and the pros. Of course, we're keeping an eye on the Pelicans right now and helping you get ready for football season with in-depth high school football team previews and, of course, articles including by the person to my left, helping you prepare for Saints training camp in the regular season to come, also LSU and Tulane, you name it. And you can catch me as part of the 6 o'clock hour throughout the week on WGSO 990 AM with Ken Trahan. One of the two of us hosts a sports show each and every weekday. So that's where you can find me this time of year.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, and again, welcome back. Les, welcome back, and congratulations on your recent award, another award for again, the whole wing that you got set up for all the awards that you have there. Congratulations once again.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. I am working, of course, for CrescentCitySports.com, covering the Saints and the Pelicans and a little bit of everything. But we've been running a series position by position on the Saints leading up to the start of training camp. And I'll be filing daily stories for the Daily Iberian newspaper in New Iberia during training camp, in addition to my stories for CrescentCitySports.com. And I'll be covering LSU for SaturdayDownSouth.com again. And this week actually is Top 25 week. So SaturdayDownSouth.com has a whole bunch of stories, top 25 coaches, teams, players, and my assignment was top 25 moments in the SEC in the last decade. Wow. So that will generate a lot of disagreement.
No doubt. Well, and how difficult was that? Because, I mean, there's a lot of great moments in SEC football.
Yeah, it was really difficult, and we actually got the whole staff involved, and people sent in their suggestions, so I could kind of go through all of them and pick out what was best, and you could have done more than 25.
Yeah, sure.
So I tried to, get every team mentioned to some degree and get off the field, on the field stuff, get a little balance. So I think it's an interesting read, and certainly there will be a variety of opinions. Yeah. So if it hasn't already posted today, it'll be posting while everybody is hunkered down during the storm. So it'd be a good time to go check that out.
No doubt, and I'll be checking it out for sure. I love that kind of stuff. And again, Les has mentioned it, again, our prayers with everyone in South Louisiana, maybe having to deal with the tropical event, whether it be Tropical Storm Barry or Hurricane Barry, and hopefully after what we dealt with on Wednesday here in New Orleans, that we won't see the type of rain that is expected. And we got some really good news today about the Mississippi River and the storm surge there will not be as high as they had originally forecast. It's going to be at least a foot lower. And guys, we've never seen that in this town. I mean, again, when we have tropical events, we've never had a situation where the river has been as high as it was, and kind of unprecedented. And I think it had a lot of people nervous about this situation, especially again with 15 or so feet of water that's been pounding against those levees for almost 5 months now. So again, whether you're watching us here in New Orleans, whether you're watching us around Louisiana, I want to say a prayer for those of us down here in South Louisiana that we come out of this thing unscathed. Guys, let's start off with the New Orleans Pelicans, and I can't believe we're really talking about Summer League, okay? But, I got to say, you do a radio show. You're quite frequently a guest on radio shows. For those of us that do radio, this has been a godsend. I mean, this is usually the dog days of summer where we're trying to break down, like you're doing on CrescentCitySports.com, the positions on the Saints team, talking about, who's the third tight end, who may come in as the second running back. And what David Griffin has done in terms of transforming this franchise is something unlike we've never seen here in New Orleans. I guess we can equate it to something Les, you and I talked about when Jim Finks came into New Orleans and he took over the New Orleans Saints. And, of course, Jim Moore was hired and of course, delivered them to the opportunity to get to the playoffs for the first time and really turned around the entire franchise. David Griffin has done this kind of at supersonic rate in terms of taking the job on April the 12th and what we're seeing now. Summer League has actually been fun to watch because I think there's been more depth and more talent than I've ever seen on a Pelicans summer team roster. And a lot of that is going to translate as you look at the roster now as it stands to a roster that has depth and a roster that has probably more talent across the board than we've seen here in New Orleans for a long, long time, if ever.
It's remarkable when you watch these games and you see especially the last two for the Pelicans to go 3-1 and more than likely qualify for the Summer League playoffs for the championship. The 3 draft picks that came after Zion Williamson from the Lakers trade, turning that number 4 overall pick to number 8, number 17, and number 35, and coming up with 3 guys that you can now project seeing just a little of them in Summer League. You don't know how good they're going to be year one, and you don't know how good they're going to top out and be. But these are NBA players. These are guys that are going to help you. The Brazilian Luzado is going to go over to Australia for a year, learn the English language, and continue to develop. But he looks like somebody who could help you this year if he wasn't already slated to do that. But just remarkable how good as a raw player Jackson Hayes looks. There were a lot of question marks. Modern NBA, you need wings and guards. What do you do in drafting a project center, number 8 overall? And if he can't shoot from the outside, why are you thinking about pairing him with Zion Williamson? Well, what we've seen in these Summer League games is insane elite athleticism, incredible hands, the son of a former NFL tight end, runs the floor like a gazelle, and nearly 7 feet tall already at the age of 19. When he gets into a strength and conditioning program that Aaron Nelson, another great hire by Griffin, has in store for him, he's going to be a very good player in the NBA at the minimum. Maybe not year one, but down the line. And then Nikhil Alexander-Walker is just a mind-blowingly polished player.
Yes.
Couple of years in college versus just one. That makes a big difference, and you can see it. But here's an ambidextrous guard at 6'5" who has great length. He's not an explosive leaper, but he knows how to shoot the basketball. He knows how to finish in the lane, even though he doesn't have that explosion around the rim. And he flat out can run a team. I think what we're learning from the Summer League about him is he's going to be able to help year one when he gets minutes, and it might even be as the point guard. So he's got that kind of versatility coming in as what was expected to be a shooting guard. At Virginia Tech, he played a little bit of the point, and you can see how he was able to accomplish that for a team that was an NCAA tournament team, a Sweet 16 team. So just thrilled to see these guys play, because you know that adds to the depth of the veterans that were added from the Lakers, young veterans who have their careers in front of them, and obviously Zion Williamson. There hasn't been this much hope, this much excitement, much less in July for the Pelicans, since the Hornets moved here.
Right. You know what's mind-blowing about this, Les? And Jude was right to go the direction he went. He talked about Nikhil Alexander-Walker. He talked about Lozada Silva. He talked about Jackson Hayes. We're not talking about Zion. I mean, he was the biggest catch in the draft, but it goes to show you, again, what Griff was able to do in turning, again, the pick from the Lakers, number 4 pick, into these 3 picks, and what these guys can immediately generate for you. I mean, it just kind of overshadowed, and of course Zion's not playing right now, but still, this has been really the talk of the town, these three players and what they've been able to do. I'll throw Bigsby Williams in there as well from LSU because he looks like a guy that could be a two-way player for this Pelicans team. You've covered sports for a while here in this town. You've seen the Jazz as when we were coming up as kids. You've seen obviously the Hornets when they made their relocation here, and of course now again, which is morphed into the Pelican franchise. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I was trying to think if I could ever remember a roster overhaul to this degree in a positive manner. Usually when a roster changes this dramatically, it's somebody blowing it up, like the Florida Marlins famously did after winning the World Series, like the Lakers did when Phil Jackson retired and Shaq went to Miami. But to take an average to below average roster and turn it over to this degree and elevate the expectations the way they have been, I can't remember anything comparable to this. And what's really remarkable, and y'all both touched on it, is the fact that Zion Williamson played like a quarter and a half. And there's this much excitement, this much dialogue about what this team is doing out in Vegas without him really being part of the equation. So that tells you how well they appear to have done with the other players they brought in. And the other thing you notice looking at the scores and watching them play is the excitement that the players seem to have. They've bought into being part of this franchise. You look at summer league games sometimes, and you can see there are a lot of guys there that are not going to be in the NBA. You see some guys who maybe are intimidated or maybe don't want to be there, and it's really lackluster.
Yes.
These guys are excited about the opportunity they have to show what they can do to begin their NBA careers. And that's why you've seen a couple of scores that were really ridiculously lopsided.
Right.
And I think it's the motivation in addition to the talent that these guys have.
And when you look at them play and you're impressed by their energy, it's because of the system. Fred Vinson, who's on the staff, is handling the coaching duties in the Summer League. And he's known more for being a shooting guru than anything else, but he is clearly quickly put in the system. And we mentioned these draft picks. They weren't even eligible because of the weird quirk that the trade didn't go through until after the first two Summer League games. But no matter who's been on the floor, they've embraced the idea of running. And they're very much stressing crashing the boards and then getting up the floor as quickly as possible. Alvin Gentry sticking around as head coach and having his type of team now in place, his type of personnel. He wants this team to lead the league in pace. They're clearly leading the Summer League now in pace, especially the past couple of games and blowing teams out of the gym. Teams that had lottery picks and first-round picks playing on their teams for the Bulls and for the Cavs. So it wasn't like it was some of the worst teams because there's 32 teams playing over there, not just NBA teams. That's how impressive this group looks, and like we talked about, I think it's good that Zion had the knee clash. Not that you ever want to see anybody get hurt, but it's not a real injury.
No.
He wasn't in shape. He's been running around the circuit. He was at the ESPYs this week as a result of not having to play for the Summer League team. He needs to get into a conditioning program and start working on his skill level. And he was the least prepared of these young players, really, to play in these games because of what he went through since the end of his Duke season, where I think he had only played in 5 or 6 games late in the regular season and in the NCAA tournament after that injury with the shoe blowout and having the knee issue there. So here's a guy who's not in the type of conditioning he needs to be in, not only to thrive in the NBA as of July, but also to thrive in this system. So they don't even need him out there. They know that he's got the strength and has the energy and the skill, but he needs to get into shape, and that allows these other guys to shine and develop as much as you can develop in the Summer League. But showing out and having the confidence to know, hey, we can play and we belong here, to have that early is something that's going to benefit them from training camp forward.
Yeah, I would agree. And of course, Frank Jackson comes in, he scores 30. Now they say, look, we don't need to see any more of you. They put him on the end of the bench. Supposedly an injury. We'll see how that goes. But, guys, when the draft first happened, you figure Zion's on the active roster. And then you started looking at Jackson Hayes, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Didi Louzada Silva. And you say to yourself, well, maybe they're going to be in the G League. And maybe, that'll be where they'll be in the first year. They're still 19 years old. Of course, Louzada Silva is going to be, as you mentioned, the NBL in Australia. That's already a done deal. But there's a decision to make here, because I think legitimately Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker can be on the active roster. You can have them with the parent club. Now, they're going to get a lot more playing time if they go into the G League, and it'll help them progress. But at the same time, you kind of do you want them with the parent club because you brought in a J.J. Redick, you brought in a Derek Favors, you have a Drew Holiday, these culture-driving veterans that Griffin was saying that he was looking for in terms of free agents or trades. It's a dilemma for them. For me, I say you got to put them on the court with the parent club, and if necessary, if they're not really getting the playing time at some point, then you move them down to the G League.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the center is a little more raw than the kid from Virginia Tech. So I think he's a stronger candidate to go down to the D League, especially with them acquiring Derek Favors and also having Jahlil Okafor. Mm-hmm. So I think he's probably a better candidate for that. But you're right, that's an interesting decision for them to make. How do they balance getting more experience in the G League and getting more valuable but less experience with a parent club? And I think a lot of that's going to be figured out in training camp, even though training camp in the NBA is very short compared to the NFL and Major League Baseball. Nonetheless, I think they'll get a better sense, in addition to the Summer League, of where these guys are at and what they're able to contribute right away. So that's going to be an interesting thing to look at. But the main thing, I think, is that in the very near future, these guys are all going to be contributing to this team, even if it's not in October of 2019.
Well, I mean, you were thinking, again, 3 years, you would hope, because the way the contract is set up with J.J. Redick and Derek Favors, maybe a couple seasons these guys will be here. Derek Favors in the last of his deal, but he's only 27. You can extend him, obviously, and keep him here a little bit longer if you wanted to. But the hopes was these guys would grow into those positions. Now you're looking at the possibility of, again, them getting at least minutes with the parent club, which is along with what we thought they were going to be when this thing started right after the draft. Let's talk a little bit about what Griff has done in free agency and also with the trades. We know about the Laker core. I want to touch on that. I also want to touch on J.J. Redick coming here and what he means to the team. And then also Derek Favors. And also, let's give a lot of credit to David Griffin on how he acquired the Derek Favors with the 2 second-round picks that he got from the Golden State Warriors for their Serbian center that they've been on since he was 14 years old, and ultimately was on their Santa Cruz Warrior G team. And Griff smartly picks the guy, immediately the Golden State Warriors pick up the phone and say, wait, we want him back. They get 2 second-round picks and $1 million. They use that exact package to send to Utah for the rights to Derek Favors. So just an amazing deal-making by Griffin on everything he's touched thus far. But what are your thoughts on the veterans that they brought in now?
Well, I do want to point out, because you brought up those great points about how they've put the roster together and be able to make a trade like that to grab Favors. It's the knowledge, not only with the draft picks, but the knowledge of that particular player in the G League, Smeldick, who I think is 6'11", and a really skilled guy, but was basically being hidden by the Warriors. That's because of Trajan Langdon. Trajan Langdon is a lot like the Jeff Ireland of that side of the building.
Huh? You're right.
And it's huge because even though David Griffin's been in the media since leaving his last job running an organization and keeping up with the league and understanding what's going on, that does not mean that he had the type of knowledge that Langdon brought in immediately to know who should we target in the draft to fit this system and why. We know Langdon was on Alexander Walker for a long time. We know he knew about the Brazilian from scouting from when he was with the Nets, where he was the assistant GM. So that's so important. But just to talk about those players, look, Favors is the type of guy who's made a lot of sacrifices and is the ultimate professional. J.J. Redick could have played for any contender he wanted to play for. He could have sat back and waited, and he would have been the guy to sign with the Lakers instead of Danny Green, and probably would have gotten that little bit of extra money Green got. But he has a relationship, and there's a real Duke connection we're obviously seeing with this organization, including Langdon, the connection with Redick, and he wanted to be here. He trusted what the organization is selling. To be able to turn it around that quickly from an organization that was a joke and being laughed at around the league to one that veterans like J.J. Redick, who could go anywhere he wants as a free agent, trust and come here to commit for 2 years to be a leader, a teacher, knowing he's probably going to come off the bench, That's phenomenal. That says everything you need to know, because the media can say it, the fans can say it, you can see it in social media, but when the actual pros, especially pros who are empowered, who are in demand, if they're seeing it, that's huge. And that's the special part about Redick, who's one of the best shooters in the NBA, if not the best flat-out jump shooter in the league. That's going to help space the floor, which was a huge concern after the Lakers trade and drafting Zion Williamson. And then Favors, he isn't known for his shooting, but he wasn't asked to do that with the Jazz. But he also was asked to play out of position a lot of the times as somebody that's now what you would call an NBA modern setter. He's about 6'10", 265. He had to spend a lot of time playing next to the two-time Defensive Player of the Year at center, having to make that sacrifice to help Utah win. He was there for a long time. The outpouring of love from Utah fans and the organization seeing him go, it was all about money because they made big moves and had to restructure their roster. And he is clearly excited from what little bit we've heard from him, and we'll hear more coming up in New Orleans, that he wants to be a part of this. Those are the type of veterans that were promised by David Griffin after the draft, and sure enough, they're in place in all the right places, led by Drew Holiday, who's the face of the franchise, and who'll be empowered as well to be more of a leader now that Anthony Davis is gone.
I couldn't agree with you more. Trajan Langdon's fingerprints all over this roster now, and also someone we didn't mention, Nico Melli.
Yeah.
Again, 2 years, $8 million. The kid from Europe. He's going to be a guy who's going to come in and play immediately for this team as well.
There's no reason to think he's not a Nikola Mirotic type.
Absolutely.
He may be a bit more of a finesse version of that, but another guy who's a classic stretch four, they call it now in the league, who can flat out shoot the basketball. But when you look at his highlights and see that he played at a high level in Europe, he's somebody who's going to come in not as an NBA experienced veteran, but a veteran of big-time wars at the highest level you can play other than the NBA.
Right. Your thoughts, Les?
Well, a couple of things. One other thing we need to mention about Trajan Langdon, which was a good point, is that this all goes back to Gail Benson.
Yep, it does.
And convincing David Griffin, you're going to have what you need to build what we all want to build.
And then delivering, right?
And then delivering. And so previously, I don't think they would have had the finances committed to this to attract him away from New Jersey. So once again, she deserves credit for stepping up to the plate.
Already, $5 million putting into the practice facility as we speak right now.
So so this whole thing began with Mrs. Benson's commitment to getting the best executive out there in David Griffin, and it's all followed from there. And then with the opportunity presented by winning the lottery and trading Anthony Davis, Griffin had a fundamental choice. Do I blow this up and go with a whole bunch of 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds to surround Zion Williamson and let them all grow together? Or, and we look at 2 or 3 years down the road, or do we try and compete for a playoff berth right away, bringing in some veterans who can help us win now, even if we aren't ready for a championship yet, and use their maturity to accelerate the development of the younger players? And I think he did a really good job of balancing those two things, getting a lot of young talent through the draft, a lot of young veterans through the trade with the Lakers, but then also mixing in Derek Favors and J.J. Redick, some more seasoned players. So I think if you look at the ability to compete for a playoff spot right now because of the veterans, as well as the ability to mature on a trajectory far into the future so that they get better and better each year, I think he really did a good job of balancing those two goals.
And you rarely win a trade like that when a superstar, a once-in-a-generational player, tries to push their way out of your franchise. And Griff has done, I think, the maximum you can do with that. And one thing that was not mentioned, but also the picks in the future as well that he has from the Lakers, that he's banking on that the Lakers will start to decline down the line as LeBron ages, as Anthony Davis gets into his 30s. So that's also part of this as well. So, I mean, literally checking off every box, because both you guys have seen this. Normally the team that loses the superstar is lottery bound for years. This team doesn't look like it's lottery bound for years.
No, and I think he sensed how desperate the Lakers were to get Anthony Davis. They had to pull off that trade for Anthony Davis. And, I think a lot of us thought that the Celtics were going to be the driving force. Even if they didn't get Davis, the assets they had to offer was going to drive the price up for everybody. And they sort of backed off at the end. But the Lakers' desperation to get Anthony Davis and become relevant again in L.A., I think accomplished what Griffin had hoped the Celtics would do in terms of leverage, and they made the Lakers pay a big price to get him, and it worked out. And then on top of that, flipping the draft picks the way he did was excellent as well.
That was the part and the savvy that I don't think Dell Demps could have done. I think he could have gotten close to this deal as far as the players and a first-round pick or two back in February, but I don't think he has the savvy that Griffin showed there to understand the desperation of the Lakers. And we saw with all the superstar movement that might have played out, because in the end, LeBron James was not able to recruit that extra superstar. I think he was convinced that, hey, if we get Anthony Davis here, I'll get the third guy to come. It didn't work out that way. Imagine where they'd be if he wouldn't have pulled it off to push the front office to make this trade. So we don't care about that as far as New Orleans goes. We want it to fail, but the fact that we want it to fail is more intense because of how good of a trade Griffin was able to put together. He took advantage of a former agent as a GM in Rob Pelinka, somebody that was in a position where he had to pull off the deal. It wasn't so much even just the Lakers, it was this particular GM, and that's why experience matters so much. And there's no question in my mind that Griffin extracted more from LA than Demps ever could have.
And then, of course, we kind of glazed over it, getting rid of the Solomon Hill contract to Atlanta, getting those picks for that number 4 pick, turning that into 3 more picks, which, again, the rookies we've talked about. Guys, as we sit here today, and look, it's hard to be able to project, especially with so many young players and a changeover in the roster. We don't even know what the chemistry is going to be like yet. But on paper, they can compete for an 8th seed. Now, whether they get into the 8th seed or not is way up in the air. But this can be competitive basketball here in New Orleans this year.
Sure, because they're going to have the type of depth to play this style, and if they succeed in playing at the fastest pace in the NBA, they're going to be a difficult team to deal with every time out. Now, they're going to have their struggles. They're going to have their games where it just doesn't click, because when you play fast, it's not clicking, it gets sloppy. But over the course of 82 games, they're going to be a tough out, because they're going to work these young players in, these rookies. They're going to be able to go 10 and 12 deep if they stay relatively healthy, and that means they're going to be difficult when you're playing those back-to-backs and those 3 games in 4 days or 5 days, especially against these other teams in the West that are a bit thinner because they had to make sacrifices to add these superstars. They're going to jump up, and they may wind up beating the Lakers and beating the Clippers in an individual game, and they're certainly going to be able to compete in the deep West because they were built the right way, and you both touched on it. They have just enough of a veteran presence to be able to keep them focused on the task at hand, the day-to-day work, and being ready to come in, ready to play on game night. And I think we're going to see that they're going to pull a lot of surprises this year. I don't know what their record's going to be, but it wouldn't shock me at all if they have a winning record and they're in it come April to try to make the playoffs, because there's enough talent there and a bunch of guys that are going to be unleashed for the first time in their careers to be able to take on more of a role and feel less pressure trying to do so.
That would be great. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think they will be in position toward the end of the season to possibly qualify for the playoffs. And the West is deep, and it's probably more competitive now because of Golden State's situation. But it's deep. It's really deep. The Lakers, you would assume, as much as they've had problems, not being able to put together what they had hoped to put together, they've gotten a lot better, and they're probably going to be one of the 8 teams. So you're adding them to the mix with the 8 teams, from last year. So there's an awful lot of competition, and there's an awful lot of growing for these guys to do on the job. So, a playoff berth is by no means assured next year, but there's every reason to think that they are going to be in the hunt for one of those 8 spots.
And when you look at the playoff picture from last year to this year in the West, you see the Thunder are clearly taking a big step. By the time you watch this, maybe Russell Westbrook will be traded away along with Paul George already gone, and they'll be completely starting over, not a playoff team. The Kings, Sacramento's a little bit ahead of New Orleans in their youth rebuild with the right mix of veterans, but they didn't make the playoffs last year. They could be a very similar team to the Pelicans, and they'll be around the same record battling for that. Dallas has made big moves, another young team, so they're pushing up while a team like the Thunder is sliding back. Lakers are stepping up. The Spurs become a huge question because they don't really have a superstar. They have maybe the best coach in the game in Greg Popovich, but we don't know how good they're going to be. So there's going to be some real movement there amongst those final playoff spots, and there's no question that the Pelicans have enough talent to put themselves in the mix. It's going to, I think, come down to how quickly they gel the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season. They don't want to lose ground, which was a real big problem in the last regime. Slow starts and having to play catch up.
And you mentioned Aaron Nelson, what he's going to mean for this team, again, training-wise, preventive maintenance in terms of injuries, and getting guys back on the court, something that has been an Achilles heel for this team, really going all the way back to the George Shinn days, but especially within the last 7 years or so years. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We come back. We're shifting gears to the New Orleans Saints. We'll also try to get to the LSU Tigers and Tulane Green Wave, so we're talking football next. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Tonight on the panel from CrescentCitySports.com, award-winning journalist Les East, my good friend Jude Young. We'll be right back.
Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Tonight, Les East of CrescentCitySports.com and Jude Young of CrescentCitySports.com are our guests. Guys, let's talk some Saints. Because you've broken down the roster, I'm going to start with you. Been a little debate back and forth, and I've debated with so many people on this. How many roster spots do you think are really available for this team right now?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't really put a number to it. I would guess that fewer than 10 for sure.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about, center is probably the only spot on the team where a starting position is up for grabs. And that's a good thing. A lot of teams out there, even good teams, are trying to figure out who's going to start in some key positions. And the Saints have 3 viable candidates there. So even that area, I think, is probably going to be okay. Everything else is just backup positions. Who are going to be the backup receivers, who's going to be the third tight end, the secondary, defensive line. Both of those positions are probably overloaded a little bit. They're going to have to cut some pretty good people there. And the depth on the offensive line, I think there's some transition going on there. So, 6, 8, 9 positions maybe are up for grabs on this team, but they're almost all backup positions. They have as much stability and talent and probably depth as anybody in the NFL, and that's why I think there's so much excitement around this training camp.
In all your years covering this team, have you ever seen the team this deep? Now, we can go back to the Super Bowl team, but where you're going into a training camp and you're saying maybe 6 positions might have a chance to be able to have new faces in it.
No, I don't think so. I think last year was probably the deepest team they'd ever had, and I think with the free agents they brought in on the defensive line, a couple of DBs possibly from the draft making the lineup, and of course Eric McCoy making it at center. I think they're going to be even deeper this year. There's not a weakness on this team. If there is, I can't think of it, but there's some unproven depth at wide receiver.
Yes.
And a couple of your young defensive backs took a step back last year, but they're still very good players. You just hope they get back on the right trajectory with Lattimore and Williams. And Eli Apple figures to be better as well. But I just don't see any weaknesses on this team. There are going to be some competition for backup positions, but I just don't see anything that would qualify as a weakness, and I think that means they are the deepest team that we've seen.
Same questions.
And Les touched on the wide receiver position, and I think you're right about the starting position at center. You got a veteran versus a rookie there, but either one of them should be fine. Other than that, the kick return situation, they brought in a veteran. They're going to get some young guys. So, I mean, we know that, but wide receiver is still very important because even though they signed Jared Cook, and that's a huge signing because that gives them essentially their second receiver to pair with Mike Thomas. Outside of him, Ted Ginn's limited. He stretches the field for you, but he's not somebody that you want to have out there preponderance of the snaps and have him running quick outs and being a third down go-to guy. They're still looking for that guy when you know Mike Thomas is going to see double coverage. So I'm anxious to see how that plays out. You would think that Traquan Smith coming into his second year has an edge if he can take a step forward after really slipping back midseason and falling out of reliability.
Was that the rookie wall in your opinion?
I think so. I just remember the play against Dallas where he dropped the wide receiver screen, should have scored on it, and the Saints wound up not scoring on that possession and being stopped on fourth down, and the anger that Sean Payton had with him, and that wasn't the first time. And from that point on, Sean Payton didn't really trust him, and I don't think he trusted himself. Now, he can grow from that, take that adversity and move forward. We'll see, because he has a great deal of talent. He has the size, the speed, and he showed the good hands in traffic at times. So he's got to have a bit of an edge there to see more snaps, at least going in. But I think the last receiver they added to the group,
Rashard Matthews?
Rashard Matthews has to be somebody that's really watched, because I think injury cost him the ability to continue to have a solid career. He profiles as a reliable number 2. He was very good at moving the chains, a lot of times being a number 1 target for the Titans. I have a hunch he's going to come in and he's going to be a tough guy to keep off the roster and maybe even off the field. So at least you feel more comfortable about that. So even there, the Saints did a nice job of adding more competition, and that's the key to the whole roster. There's so much competition, and there may be only 6 or 8 roster spots up for grabs, but there's several guys at each spot in each role that are going to compete for that. So it's going to make every day of training camp and those preseason games consistently interesting.
I think Jude touched on it. Talk about the wide receiver position and where you think the depth is. And look, a lot of those guys, Kirkwood, et al., they have to step up this year because that was truly a weakness for this team last year when you really only had Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas that you could count on in the passing game.
Yeah, and I think Rashard Matthews is the insurance policy with Cam Meredith because he last year was not healthy, and they asked him to take a pay cut, and he didn't participate in much in the OTAs.
Do we even think Cam Meredith is really anything other than a wild card at this point? No. Seeing him unable at this point in time.
Still could get on the field during OTAs.
It makes me feel like it would be a surprise at this point if he's part of the final 53-man roster.
And that's why they brought Matthews in, because they couldn't count on Meredith being out there. And they already, by having him take the pay cut, they already demonstrated they're running out of patience with him. So wide receiver is wide open. Certainly Traquan Smith looks like the guy who probably has the most upside, but was very inconsistent last year. Keith Kirkwood, probably a little more consistent than Smith last year, but doesn't appear to have quite as much upside. And if you look at from Thanksgiving night on, the offense really was less consistent than it was up to that point. Now, there were a lot of factors there. You had the injuries on the offensive line. Ted Ginn had missed a lot of time, came back later, and added a little something to the mix. But I think a lot of it was the lack of depth at wide receiver that got exacerbated by Ginn's injury. And so if they're going to avoid the inconsistency in the offense that they had late in the year, someone has to emerge in the receiving group, and Rashard Matthews maybe can give them somebody who's more dependable. They do mitigate it with Cook and Alvin Kamara, 2 guys who help the passing game a great deal who aren't wide receivers. So that helps a little bit, but you don't want those guys being your second and third receivers because you can't count on your wide receivers.
And let's face it, they could have easily lost to the Eagles in the divisional round. They only scored 20 points. They were lucky that a reliable receiver and Alshon Jeffrey dropped an easy pass 2 minutes to go in the game. If he catches it, they're inside the 20, and it looked like they had the momentum to score and win the game. Right. But you only score 20 points there, and you have all the opportunities in the world in the NFC Championship game to put away the Rams early, and you don't have reliable enough players out on the field. You're asking Dan Arnold to make key catches. Yes. If Dan Arnold is Jared Cook, or of course if it's Ben Watson healthy and able to play, maybe he makes that catch in the back of the end zone. And if that catch is made in the back of the end zone, we don't have to worry about a no call. I think the Saints are in the Super Bowl. Right. But that was how thin the margins were against the good teams, the best teams in the NFL for that offense, because they weren't able to do what we expect them to do, especially when the defense is solid. Well, if the defense is solid, holding its own and creating turnovers here and there, the offense is going to score 30 points in the dome, right? In 2 playoff games, they couldn't get there. True. And that's why they weren't in the Super Bowl as much as a flag that wasn't thrown.
Before we go to the defense, talk about the running back position, because you got to wonder if Kamara's going to be on a pitch count here, considering how much he has to deal with, not just running the football, but being part of the passing game. You lose Ingram, and now you're in a situation where maybe you're still looking for that physical back. Talk a little bit about that position, who you think emerges, especially in terms of a backup role.
Well, certainly Latavius Murray was brought in to replace Mark Ingram and take on the same role that
Different
Ingram
style,
had.
though, right?
Different style, and I don't think he'll be as productive as Mark Ingram was. I doubt that he can come in his first season here and have the kind of impact in the locker room that Ingram had over several years.
Yes.
But he'll be okay. He'll be a good player. He'll be able to complement Kamara and take some of the burden off of Kamara. But it may not be he may not be as effective as Mark Ingram was. And then after that, it's wide open. You know, who's going to be – there's going to be a third guy active on Sundays.
And does that have to be a physical back? Because I don't think they have a physical back when you talk about either Murray or Kamara right now. You know, that guy. Now, I know they went a lot with Taysom Hill around the goal line. It took a lot of carries away from Mark Ingram. At some point, teams are going to figure that out. But again, to have a guy that you can count on third down, short yardage, you need the short yardage. Ingram was that guy.
Right.
And who's that guy now?
Well, they don't really have a guy there, and so that's it wouldn't shock me if they brought in a veteran running back at some point during training camp just to kick the tires and see if somebody can maybe fill that role, because certainly the third running back spot is wide open at this point. So it wouldn't be shocking if that winds up being somebody who's not on the roster at the moment.
Well, I think what Murray shows here in camp in the preseason is going to matter a lot as to who that third back is, because he's not going anywhere. Kamara's not going anywhere. There will be a third guy. And will Murray show what we haven't seen from him in his career with the Raiders and the Vikings? Some ability to catch the football consistently so it's not predictable based on which running back is in the game. I don't even worry about him as much as being a short yardage issue. I think he'll be productive there, even though he's more of an upright runner. He's strong and he makes good decisions in short yardage. Can he catch the ball? Will he be reliable as a pass blocker as well? So we have to see that, and I think the Saints have to see that. They're going to ask him to do a little bit more. And if he can't do that, then that's going to open the door maybe for Buck Allen to be a guy who makes the team, because he has been a feature back at times, although not preferred in Baltimore, and he can catch the football. And he is maybe a poor man's Pierre Thomas, if you look back at the Saints offense in the past. So maybe he makes the team. If not, and they think that Murray can be a receiver and a threat, maybe not quite as reliable and as much of a threat as what we saw from Mark Ingram, but still somebody that can go out and catch passes regularly in the flat and be a threat in the screen game, then perhaps Ozigbo, the rookie from Nebraska, the undrafted rookie, makes it, because he's got the profile as a 4-year college back, but not a lot of wear and tear. Emerged his senior year, 230 pounds, was really good in short yardage, really good between the tackles. So Murray might determine who that running back is more than anybody else who's competing for the job to be the third back.
Let's shift gears to the defense. Let's talk about the nickel back, because we keep hearing about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and his ability to play safety and the nickel. You've had Patrick Robinson, obviously, as part of that. Some other guys in the mix as well. Talk a bit about that position exclusively.
Well, Gardner-Johnson was a guy who looked the part in OTAs and minicamp. He looked like he might be ready to play as a rookie. It's hard to tell a lot under those circumstances, but he certainly didn't demonstrate that it was too big for him. So he's going to be in the mix. Patrick Robinson, I don't think anybody knows with his age and coming off a serious injury. I don't know. Maybe he winds up in the mix. Maybe he starts there, but that's certainly a question mark at this point. I think P.J. Williams played probably his best football with the Saints when he stepped into the nickel position, replacing Robinson.
Yeah.
So he's going to be a factor there, but that's going to be one of the positions to keep an eye on in training camp and the preseason games. And Gardner Johnson certainly is going to be a guy to keep an eye on because he's a guy we don't know a lot about compared to the other two. So we want to see if what we saw initially is reinforced in training camp and especially the preseason games.
And I think that there's a lot of high hopes for this rookie because it's good that the Saints in the 4th round were able to grab a player that they had graded in the top 2 rounds at this particular Swiss Army knife position, we'll call it, because Les, you mentioned it, the nickelback situation, coming back from injury with Patrick Robinson is a big, big deal. P.J. Williams, who had some off-the-field issues, and we still don't know if he can carry over one season to the other and be a reliable
We don't know if there's going to
pro.
be a suspension either yet.
Right, correct. And then we talk about the 2 safeties who are young, and hey, Von Bell took a step forward, but he may not be a guy that you want to have playing in the slot on the line of scrimmage. He may have limitations that the Saints aren't thrilled about as far as moving forward and having to pay him in another year. And then we know about the other safety spot and a player who took a step back. And Gardner Johnson could wind up filling a number of these roles as a result of that. So there may be a little bit of pressure on the rookie. So it's probably good that he's got a bit of cocky attitude to him because they're going to ask him, I think, to try a lot of different things they already have here in the offseason. Once he gets to camp to see when the real bullets are flying, can he step up? Because he could wind up playing a crucial role in the pass defense.
If there's a position on the team where there is a opening for someone to step up on the defensive side of the ball, what is it? And I would kind of guide you guys toward the defensive end, the rush defensive end position. Davenport's got to step up here. If it's not him, obviously somebody has to emerge here. They went and got Wes Horton. They've made some moves in terms of bringing in mid-level free agents. Malcolm Brown, I think, will be a nice addition on the inside. Good news about Onyemata only missing one game, and of course we know Rankins may not be available until late in the season. And then how effective can he be? So it's really some questions along that defensive line.
Yeah, and I would talk about the line as a unit, or not break it down a lot into tackles versus end because there's so much flexibility now, 3-man fronts, 4-man fronts. Some guys can slide inside and outside. So they need to find a solid rotation there. I think they have a lot of depth there, a lot of good players. But obviously Marcus Davenport has to step up and become a really good player, especially a pass rusher in his second year. I think at times last year, even though he was hurt as a rookie, he showed why they traded up for him. He has an awful lot of talent. I think he's capable of being a very good player in the NFL, but he's got to take a lot of strides toward that this year from the defensive end position. And then I think they have a lot of guys who can rotate. Rankins at this point, we don't know what to expect from him. He's probably going to miss some time early in the regular season. That's a very bad injury for anyone, especially someone of that size. So there are some question marks on the defensive line. I think they're going to have a lot of good players, serviceable players, and a good rotation, but they have to have a second impact player after Cameron Jordan. Davenport's the most promising candidate for that.
And because you don't know if Davenport can hold up for 16 games, you just don't know where he's at this point in his career, despite the immense talent. Depth there is going to be important. Who can actually play the edge in the base defense in the 4-man front? And somebody to watch who really fell out of, I'm not going to say favor, but certainly out of playing time was Trey Hendrickson.
Yes.
Third-round pick a couple of years ago, has a great deal of talent, but you knew he had a lot to learn. So maybe he's ready to step up because I think the door's wide open for him to be the third true defensive end in the rotation because Cam Jordan's not going to come off the field very much, but if any nicks and any injuries happen to either him or Davenport, they're going to have somebody who can do what Alex Okafor did as essentially the third end last year, and they don't have anybody that I think they know they can rely on at this point going into camp.
To the phone lines we go. Tom is in Metairie. Tom, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Tom.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Great.
I wanted to see what you guys thought about Marcus Williams' play last year. it seemed like he was late to the ball a lot. And maybe it's just my imagination. I want to see what you guys thought about that. I'll hang up.
Thank you, Tom. Guys, why don't you go and take it?
Well, that's an interesting point because it's hard to know exactly maybe why he played a bit more cautiously than he did the first time around. Maybe it was because with Von Bell and his limitations, and because we know that the free agent disaster and trying to basically deal with being the only guy back there that had the speed to truly cover the three quarters of the back of the secondary. Maybe that was the reason why, and they feel like adding Gardner Johnson and another year for Von Bell, and who knows who steps up. They drafted multiple safeties, so that tells you something. Maybe that it'll be easier for Williams. And you have to wonder, no matter how many times you can say what happened in Minnesota 2 years ago in the playoffs wasn't in his mind, maybe it did affect his aggressiveness and his self-confidence. And we know when it comes to playing in the secondary, not just corner, these guys have to have short memories, confident in themselves and their playmaking abilities. And I don't think it necessarily helped that the cornerback play wasn't as good as it was the year before either. When you're the last line of defense and you've got that in your ear, you're probably going to play a bit more conservatively. If the corners play better and the fellow safeties show more versatility this year, maybe he'll be better.
Thoughts?
Well, he did take a bit of a step back last year. I think possibly they asked more of him mentally than they did as a rookie. I assume they kept things pretty simple for him the first year and let him just play on instinct.
Right.
I think they probably put more on his plate mentally on the back end, and maybe that was an adjustment for him that didn't happen as quickly as you would like. I'm not a coach, so I can't figure that out exactly, but I think that's certainly a possibility for a player going from his first year to his second year. But he has the athletic ability, and he showed as a rookie that he can be a good player in the league. So I wouldn't be down on him at this point, but I would also be keeping an eye on him to see if he works through that and gets back to where he was as a rookie and maybe does a better job of blending the physical and the mental.
And to add on to what I was saying, before Marshawn Lattimore, he took a step back last year as well. So you had two sophomore slumps going on in the back of the secondary. So maybe that's adjustments by opponents seeing film. I think maybe more with Lattimore is a little bit of overconfidence and how he spent his offseason. I expect him to come back with a vengeance. And if he's out there being a terror and a true shutdown corner, I think that's going to help everybody, including Williams.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's shift gears to the college game. Just a few weeks out from fall camp. Start with the Tulane Greenway. They took the next step last year, getting to a bowl game. Tying for first place in their division in the conference. Your thoughts on Willie Fritz's team this year, based on what we know right now?
Well, we'll see how they handle expectations because at least 6 wins, even though I think I saw Las Vegas only has them at 5.5. I think at least 6 wins are expected within the program and locally to follow up and go to a bowl game again. It should only help that Justin McMillan's in the system, just like up in Baton Rouge. We'll talk about another transfer quarterback in Joe Burrow. It's only going to help being there for a full year in the system and proving what you need to know and knowing the system. So we'll see how that works out as far as McMillan goes because they're going to ask a lot more of him. Making the change at offensive coordinator and bringing in somebody who's going to ask the quarterback to throw the football more RPOs, more getting the ball out quickly and making the right decision. That's going to put pressure on McMillan, and if he can handle that, it's going to help take Tulane a step forward because they're recruiting really well the last couple of years. You're seeing a lot more 3-stars come along, which they need to have on the roster to compete in the American at their level. So it's exciting. I think they're going to be very good defensively, and they're very good up front as far as rushing the passer. So that gives them a real shot there. College football is all about the spread and the passing game. You've got to get to the quarterback, but you also offensively have to be a threat throwing the ball. We'll see if these changes take it, if McMillan's the right guy to move them forward there, because they're going to face enough of a schedule here where if they play well, they're going to win 6 games. Can they do more than that? Because we saw them down the stretch. They're playing meaningful games last year in November with a chance to go to the conference championship game. There's a lot of parity in that conference below what UCF's been the last few years. Hopefully they're able to take advantage of it and be in that position again and be a more complete team to try to take advantage.
Your take, Les?
Well, I think the big unknown is the offensive coordinator. And they're going from a triple option attack that's pretty rare in college football to a much more commonplace type of offense with the new coordinator. Came from Memphis, I believe, which certainly is nothing like a triple option offense. Justin McMillan is a talented guy who played well last year, is capable of handling that type of scheme, I think. If they are able to make that transition smoothly and pass the ball well and be more multi-dimensional on offense, then I think they can definitely win 6 games, maybe 7 games, and take another step. But that's the giant unknown, is how well they make that transition on offense.
All right, let's shift gears to LSU because we've got a few minutes left. A lot of people believe this is the year that they can go to the Final Four based on the schedule, returning players. Les, what's your thoughts?
I think they can. I don't know if they will. I still don't. For SaturdayDownSouth.com, we all had to send in our SEC picks. I picked them second in the West. You can probably guess who I had first in the West. But I do think they have a chance to be ahead of Texas A&M, Mississippi State, and Auburn, who are probably those teams after Alabama that are competing with LSU at the top of the Western Division, with Ole Miss and Arkansas kind of lagging behind right now. So I think they're capable of doing that. That game at Texas, the second week of the season, is so important.
It's the pivotal game on the schedule, right?
That and then the Florida game is going to be huge also. Because the Texas game is so early, they can lose that and come back if they run the table except for the Alabama game. And I'm not ruling out beating Alabama, but I think you have to assume that that's a long shot. So the Florida game then becomes, you can't overcome 2 losses before Alabama, and it's harder to overcome your first loss against Florida later in the season than it would be Texas. So those, if they beat Texas and they beat Florida, yes, they can be in the playoff.
Wrap it up for us.
I think talent-wise, LSU is going to play 11 of the 12 teams in the regular season schedule and have a better overall roster, a better overall 2 deep, barring injuries. And you mentioned it, the importance of that Texas game week 2. Can you take an offense on the road that's now going to be a modern offense as far as getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, put the ball in the hands of playmakers? I think Joe Burrow can execute that. My only question with their personnel is I still don't think they're good enough to be a national championship contender at the tackle spots. They may not get tested by Texas. I don't think their defense is that good. Maybe they'll be in a shootout because they're on the road, so they'll still be challenged there. But once they play these SEC defensive lines, can they hold up? At least by bringing in Joe Brady and deciding that they're going to finally play like most teams play and let the quarterback make quick decisions and get the ball out of his hands, you mitigate your biggest weakness on offense, because the playmaking talent between the returnees and the newcomers are as good as any team in the country. And if Burrow takes a step forward, LSU is going to take a huge step forward as far as what we've seen for the past decade plus for the most part offensively. They're going to be right up there and able to score, take more pressure off the defense, let the defense think about being an attack-minded group a little bit more, rather than try not to make mistakes and bend don't break at times when they're playing the best teams on the schedule. Look, we'll know a lot about this team against Texas. If they're scoring 30-plus points easily in that game and doing it with a dynamic offense, that says they could very well go to Alabama undefeated.
Yeah, and that defense, at least on paper, looks loaded as well.
Sure, and speed all over the place. Right. I worry a little bit about the depth on the defensive line, particularly at tackle spot. A lot of guys there who when they're healthy, are good, but a lot of injuries, and the issue of players like Rashard Lawrence coming back from another surgery. Can he hold up? There are a couple other guys on that depth chart that have similar issues. Hey, if you're not good up front on either side of the ball, you're going to have problems. So LSU might need a little luck there on defense with attrition. Les East, Jude Young, CrescentCitySports.com. Thanks so much for being on our panel tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, this is a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. Also on Pelican Sports Television every Friday night 9 p.m. and always at ericasher.com. You catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2 and the iHeartRadio app. That is noon to 2 weekdays. Listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. And also, you can check out all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our guests tonight, Les East and also Jude Young. Also the WLA production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Alex Chacon, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Stay dry, stay safe. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Good game plan is the key to success. When my team hits the field, we always have a game plan.
You should take the same approach with emergency planning. That's why Coach O and I urge you to get a game plan to make sure you, your family, and your pets are safe this hurricane season. Visit GOSEP's GetAGamePlan.org and download the new and improved Get a Game Plan app for important emergency planning information and tools to keep you safe.
Take advantage of the time you have before an emergency. Finalize your plans. Have 3 days worth of supplies and other essentials in your emergency supply kit.